The first fracture came on a Tuesday morning, an hour that should have passed without significance. I was up early, making coffee like I always did before work, feeding our dog, Bailey, and scrolling through the news. The sun had barely started pushing through the blinds, and everything in the house still carried the silence of sleep. She had a prenatal checkup that morning. Her first. We were supposed to go together. She said she'd rather go alone, said she didn't want me sitting there awkwardly, flipping through outdated magazines. Claimed it wasn't a big appointment. Just blood work. Just routine. That was the first lie she told that stuck to my ribs. I didn't argue. I smiled and told her to text me afterward. I remember exactly what I said. Let me know if it's a boy or a girl in there. She laughed, kissed my cheek, and left the house with that glow that pregnancy gives women, a glow that I used to believe was mine. I thought that was it for the morning. But I went into the laundry room to grab my work shirt, the one she always folded for me on Tuesdays, and that's when I saw it. It was small, subtle, something I shouldn't have even noticed. A navy blue hoodie draped over the washing machine. Not mine. Too slim in the arms. Too long in the torso. I picked it up. No logo. No tag. Just generic fabric. Soft. Slightly scented with cologne. Something cheap and synthetic. The kind of cologne a man wears when he's trying to impress but doesn't know how. There were crumpled receipts in the front pocket. 2 gas stations, 15 minutes apart, dated yesterday. One of them was nowhere near her route to work or the grocery store. But I didn't say a word. I just folded the hoodie neatly, tucked it back where I found it, and went about my day like my entire chest hadn't suddenly hollowed out. Later that night, she came home glowing again. But this time it was a little too much. Her cheeks flushed, her voice a little too light, like she was floating. She said the appointment went fine. Said she got blood drawn, and that was it. No ultrasound. No photos. I asked if she wanted something to eat. She said she was starving. She always is now. I offered to cook, but she insisted on Chinese takeout. Her favorite, eggplant with garlic sauce, extra rice. She picked it up herself. I watched her car leave from the window, and for a moment I pictured it swerving off the road. Not out of rage. Just a passing thought. Just a quiet, what if? After dinner, while she showered, I went back into the laundry room. The hoodie was gone. Not in the hamper, not on the washing machine. Gone like it had never been there. I checked the trash. Nothing. But I remembered the receipts. I had tucked one into my pocket earlier, just in case. I pulled it out and stared at the address. A gas station near the west end of town, close to a cluster of rundown apartment complexes. The kind of place where a woman like her wouldn't have reason to be. Not unless she was hiding something. I Googled the address. There was a yoga studio 2 blocks down. Not the kind of yoga she liked, either. This one was niche. Tucked between a vape shop and a vape repair shop. I scrolled through the reviews. Nothing stood out until one caught my eye. Andres is the real deal. Deep stretch sessions changed my life. The review was from a woman. The name didn't register, but the comment did. She had mentioned an Andres once. Offhandedly. Said he was a physical therapist her coworker recommended for her back pain. Latin guy. Hands like magic, she'd said. I hadn't thought much of it then. Now it felt like someone tightening a garrote around my neck. I went back to the bathroom. Her phone was on the counter, face down, charging. I picked it up slowly, almost reverently. No password. She never needed one. Why would she? We trusted each other. I opened her messages. Nothing out of the ordinary. Group chats. Work friends. Pregnancy apps. I was about to set it down when I thought to check her deleted texts. That's when I saw the name, Dre. Just Dre. Casual. Intimate. The most recent message, deleted 6 hours ago, read, still thinking about last night. No punctuation. Just raw and familiar. I didn't react. I didn't scream. I didn't even flinch. I put the phone back exactly where I found it and left the bathroom. When she came out wrapped in a towel, smiling, belly slightly protruding, humming some song she probably thought was stuck in her head, I smiled back. I knew then. I knew without needing a paternity test or a confrontation. I knew the child she carried might not be mine. I knew she had slept with someone else, probably more than once. And I knew, without a shadow of a doubt, that this wasn't the end of something. This was the beginning. The crack in the glass had formed, and I wasn't going to scream about it. I was going to let it spread quietly, invisibly, until the whole thing shattered in her hands when she least expected it. And she would never see it coming. Our life, on the surface, was the kind people envied. The house was modest but warm. filled with little touches she insisted on adding over the years, candles that matched the seasons, a rotating gallery of framed photos from vacations, baby shoes already hanging on a hook near the door. We had routines. Wednesday movie nights. Sunday pancake mornings. She always curled into me on the couch like gravity demanded it. Our conversations were full of soft laughter and future plans, baby names, nursery colors, daycare versus home care. I was building something stable, reliable, a foundation she could lean into as her belly grew, as life shifted beneath us. I was the kind of man who picked up her prenatal vitamins without being asked, who massaged her ankles when they swelled, who paused mid-conversation if she needed to rest. She used to look at me like I was everything. And then, almost imperceptibly, that look began to fade. It started with little things. Nothing damning. Nothing you'd ever put on paper. Just distance. A slow rewiring of her warmth. She started locking her phone. At first, she claimed it was because of patient confidentiality, some vague reference to her job, as if she'd ever once taken it that seriously before. Then she said it was just a habit, nothing to worry about. The code changed. The notification stopped previewing on the screen. But she still laughed at my jokes. Still touched my shoulder as she walked by. So I swallowed it, chalked it up to hormones, stress, the swirl of becoming a mother. I wanted to believe. I needed to believe. She started going out more, mostly on weekends. At first, it was prenatal yoga or coffee with friends, names I recognized, Emily, Rachel, the girls from her book club. But then the names changed. Vague names. One of the girls from work. A woman from yoga. An old friend. The explanations felt slippery. Her voice didn't tremble, but it never quite landed anymore. One Saturday, she came home later than usual, claiming the class ran long. She looked flushed, energized, almost euphoric. Not tired like you'd expect from a woman in her second trimester. I asked what pose they worked on that day. She blinked, hesitated, then said something about breathing and hips opening. I nodded, smiled. Let it go. But that night I sat alone in the living room long after she fell asleep, her back turned to me, her breathing even and detached. Another week, I opened the glove compartment looking for her sunglasses. There was a fresh bottle of men's cologne inside, unopened, still in its plastic wrap. A mid-range brand, nothing fancy. She said it was a gift for her brother, but her brother's birthday wasn't for 2 months, and we'd already discussed getting him a watch. I held it for a second too long, then put it back without a word. That was the night she suggested we start seeing a couples therapist, not because anything was wrong, she said, but because it's healthy to explore growth. She used that word a lot lately. Growth. Expansion. Boundaries. I told her I was open to it, of course I was, and she smiled like a teacher pleased with a student's answer. Her social media began to shift, too. It wasn't obvious, not at first. Just fewer tagged photos. A tighter privacy setting. Then one day I realized I couldn't see her Instagram stories anymore. I checked from an old burner account I'd once made for work. There she was, posting regularly, laughing over drinks. A filtered selfie at what looked like a rooftop bar captioned Self-Care Saturdays. She was glowing again, yes, but not the kind of glow that came from vitamins or maternal joy. This was the sheen of secrets, the shimmer of adrenaline. I watched the story on loop until it expired. Then I sat in the dark, gripping my phone like it might explain something. She stopped touching me at night. No excuses. No rejection. Just quiet withdrawal. Like her skin had forgotten what my hands felt like. When I brought it up, gently, carefully, she looked at me with this heartbreaking mix of pity and rehearsed calm. I'm just not feeling myself lately, she said. It's not you. It's just where I'm at emotionally. I nodded. I always nodded. That was my role now. The nodder. The stable one. The rock she could drift from without guilt. I let her keep drifting, even as the silence between us thickened into something sharp. She didn't even seem to notice. Then there were the purchases. Random Amazon boxes. New clothes she never wore around me. A new perfume she never used in our bedroom. A sleek new set of lingerie that remained unopened in her drawer. When I asked if she was planning something for us, she laughed. No, don't be silly. It's just for me. I want to feel beautiful again. She touched her belly, then her lips. Everything's changing. I want to hold on to who I am. I kissed her forehead and said, You're still you. But I was lying. The woman standing in front of me was becoming someone else. And she wanted me nowhere near the version she was turning into. Yet I said nothing. I stayed steady. I made dinner. I rubbed her back. I said all the right things at all the right moments because I still had this faint, fading hope that maybe she'd come back to me. Maybe this was a phase. Maybe the distance was fixable. I let her walk all over my instincts because the alternative, facing the truth, meant admitting I was living beside a stranger. And I wasn't ready for that. Not yet. I just needed a little more time before I shattered her world the way she was slowly, silently shattering mine. It happened on a Thursday afternoon, the kind of gray, listless day that just drifts past unnoticed unless something splits it open. She said she was going to meet a friend from her old job for lunch, a woman I'd met once at a holiday party who always spoke in soft platitudes and drank too much white wine. She hadn't mentioned her in months, but now, suddenly, they were reconnecting over sushi on the east side of town. I smiled when she told me. Said I hoped she had fun. Watched her walk out the door wearing a skirt I hadn't seen in weeks and a top I was sure she'd buried in the back of the closet months ago, the kind of low-cut, body-hugging thing she used to wear when we were dating. Before maternity, jeans and flowing cardigans took over. She even did her makeup differently, sharper, more dramatic. I kissed her cheek, told her she looked beautiful, and she smiled that tight, rehearsed smile that never quite reached her eyes anymore. She left her tablet on the kitchen counter. Normally, I wouldn't even glance at it. But as I cleared the dishes, it lit up with a notification, one she'd obviously forgotten would sync across devices. It was from a name I didn't recognize. Just 3 letters. Leo. No last name. No contact photo. The preview was short, blunt, like a knife edge. Can't stop thinking about last night. Still taste you. No emojis. No fluff. Just raw familiarity. My hands didn't even shake. My breath didn't hitch. I just stood there, staring at the screen, watching it fade to black, the silence around me deepening. I didn't open the message. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. The tone was enough. The certainty in the words, the way they landed without hesitation. This wasn't a first offense. This wasn't a drunken mistake or some line-crossed curiosity. This was a routine. A rhythm. This was someone who had been there before. I stood in the kitchen for a long time, the hum of the refrigerator suddenly too loud, Bailey curled up in the corner like even the dog knew something had shifted. I felt nothing. No rage. No sorrow. Just a strange, crystalline focus settling in my chest like ice. My mind flicked back to every odd moment of the last few months. The new lingerie she never wore for me, the locked phone, the late returns, the smell of soap that wasn't ours clinging to her skin. It all aligned. Every fracture clicked into place, forming a perfect, damning mosaic of betrayal. And still, I said nothing. I put the tablet down gently. I went into the garage and grabbed the box of baby things we'd been storing, diapers, bibs, little books she'd picked out with such feigned tenderness. I opened the smallest one, Daddy's Girl, and stared at the illustration of a man holding a baby in the air, smiling like the world was perfect. Then I began to plan. That night, she came home smiling. Brighter than usual. Flushed. Her hair slightly tousled like she'd just walked through wind, but the air outside was still. She said lunch was wonderful, that she and her friend had really connected. I asked what they talked about, and she blinked once before rattling off something about job stress, pregnancy cravings, how hard it was to stay active. She kissed me on the forehead, walked to the bedroom, and peeled off her clothes like everything was normal. But her bra was a different color than the one she left in. I noticed. Of course I noticed. I noticed everything now. She didn't see it, the way my eyes no longer lingered on her like they used to. She didn't see the way I'd stopped asking questions, stopped offering foot rubs or checking in on her cravings. She thought I was just tired. Distant, maybe, but not suspicious. Never that. Because I had always been the rock. The man who loved her without question. The man who built this life with his bare hands so she could feel safe, adored, protected. But that man had died the moment Leo popped onto that screen. I watched her eat dinner like nothing had changed. She laughed at a show we used to love, curled into me like she used to, her body warm and soft and entirely false. I stared past the television, into a future I was already constructing in exacting detail. This wasn't going to end in a fight. I wouldn't give her the satisfaction of confession or confrontation. She wasn't going to cry and beg and make this about some mistake or lapse in judgment. No. She was going to feel everything I felt, but slower, colder, in pieces. She was going to lose something precious and not realize it until it was already gone. I'd give her a life she couldn't crawl back into. I'd peel the comfort from her days so gradually she wouldn't even notice the walls closing in. Because now I knew. And knowing didn't break me. It forged me. She lit the match. I was going to watch her burn. She had no idea I was already gone from her, I moved through the days like a man possessed by clarity, not rage. I watched her carefully from the shadows of our routine, letting her believe that the silence meant I was still lulled by love. I began with small things, nothing that would raise suspicion. I created a new email address, clean and unconnected, then used it to sign up for an app that let me generate virtual numbers. With one of those, I sent her a text as Elena, a yoga classmate she'd mentioned once. The message was simple. Hey girl, want to meet at that spot again next Tuesday? Her reply came 3 minutes later. Can't. Seeing Leo. Rain check? She didn't even hesitate. Didn't bother to delete the message like she did on her tablet. That told me everything I needed to know, how relaxed she was in her betrayal. How confident. She thought she was clever, covered, untouchable. I started tracking her locations, not with some dramatic GPS trick, but with her shared Google account she had long forgotten was still linked. Every photo she took synced automatically to the cloud. And while most were innocent, pictures of her food, the dog, books she never actually read, one slipped through that caught my attention. It was taken at 2:17 p.m. in a dimly lit room with an unfamiliar mirror. I zoomed in. She stood in front of it, posed from the side, belly prominent, smile soft. Behind her, on the dresser, were 2 whiskey tumblers and a man's watch. The room wasn't ours. I checked the metadata. Geotagged to a mid-tier hotel just off the freeway, 15 minutes from the office she claimed to be visiting. That night, she brought me leftovers and told me about how long her meeting ran, how drained she felt. I nodded and asked what her colleague wore that day. She blinked, fumbled, said, "Which one?" I said, "The woman from accounting. The one who's always cold." She hesitated, then laughed nervously. "I wasn't with her. I'm in a different office." "Sorry, pregnancy brain." I smiled. Let it go. The lies were growing sloppy, riddled with holes. So I poked at them slowly, methodically. I called the hotel a week later, during lunch, and asked to speak to Mr. Leo Martin. Made up the last name. Said I was returning a lost item. The woman on the other end hesitated, then said, "Mr. Martin's not in, but he checked out this morning. Do you want to leave a message?" I hung up. That night, I told her I'd made a reservation for us to get away. A weekend escape, I said. She lit up, maybe with guilt, maybe relief. I named the same hotel. Watched her expression twitch, just slightly. "That place," she said too quickly. "I heard it's kind of run down." I said, "I thought you hadn't been." She smiled. "I haven't. I just read reviews." We didn't go. I canceled the next day. She didn't ask why. I planted another seed. I casually mentioned bumping into her friend Rachel at the store, said she asked why you weren't returning her texts. A lie, of course. Rachel had moved to Oregon months ago. But she froze for a second, then said, "Oh, weird. I texted her yesterday. Maybe she changed her number." I nodded. Made a mental note. Her reflex to cover was becoming faster, more panicked. I checked our bank account history that night, using the statements she never paid attention to. Recurring payments to a rideshare company, not unusual, but always on the days she claimed to take her own car. The drop-offs were near that same hotel. Once, even the name of a private residence popped up, same neighborhood as the yoga studio, but not on the route. I took the address, searched public records. Rented under a man named Leonardo Marchenko. A stretch from Leo, but the pieces were fitting too tightly now. I wasn't guessing anymore. I was confirming. Still, I didn't confront. I asked her one day if she was still seeing her prenatal therapist. She said yes, every other Thursday. So I called their office pretending to be scheduling a new patient intake. The receptionist was polite. Told me the therapist was no longer accepting clients and had been out for the last 3 weeks on leave. I thanked her. Hung up. That same evening, my wife told me how draining her latest session had been. She really pushed me emotionally, she said, eyes bright, voice trembling with practiced vulnerability. I brought her a glass of water and kissed her forehead. Told her I was proud of her for doing the work. She smiled. Relief mixed with affection. She still thought she had me. She had no idea she was standing in a glass house and that I was already lighting the match. The more she lied, the more I learned. I followed her best friend, Kara, once, just once. I had no intention of dragging other people in, but I needed confirmation. Kara was the link. She was always the alibi, always the name. So I parked down the street from her building and waited. Sure enough, 30 minutes after my wife claimed she was having a girls' night at Kara's, she pulled up in her car, changed her top in the driver's seat, and got into a sleek black SUV that pulled up behind her. I watched them drive off together. I didn't follow. I didn't need to. I had what I came for. Proof. Real, irrefutable, crushing proof. And still, I said nothing. Because when you're planning an execution, you don't announce it. You sharpen the blade, polish it until it gleams, and wait for the moment when your target finally stops looking over their shoulder. That's when you strike. And I was almost there. It was a Thursday night when I decided it would end. Not with screaming. Not with slammed doors or broken glass. But with precision. She had a work event. One of those open-floor cocktail things where spouses were invited to mingle and smile and nod while executives made forgettable speeches. She insisted I come, said it was important, said I should meet her new department head. I smiled and told her I'd be there. I even ironed my shirt for it. When we arrived, she floated around the room like a woman in full command of her image. Laughing too loud. Touching shoulders she shouldn't. She left my side often, always with a polite excuse. Just going to check on something, or be right back. Someone needs me. She didn't notice how still I was. How quiet. I had already set everything in motion. Earlier that day, I'd uploaded a short video onto a hidden tab in the event's presentation system, one that would activate when I pressed a simple Bluetooth switch in my pocket. The organizers, thinking it was my wife's team submitting a late company highlight reel, had no reason to question the USB I handed in. It was a brief loop. Just 10 seconds. Just enough. As the speeches wrapped up, the host handed the mic to her, praising her for her leadership and commitment. She stepped up, all grace and composure, thanking her team, talking about collaboration and community, every word another layer of the lie she lived in. Then, I tapped the switch. The main screen behind her flickered once, twice, and then there she was, in grainy hotel hallway footage. Her hair down, coat half open, laughing, hand in hand with Leo. He kissed her neck. She pulled him into the room. The timestamp glowed at the bottom corner. Her voice caught in her throat mid-sentence. The crowd fell silent. Her boss froze. She turned, saw it, blinked like maybe she could unsee it. Gasps broke out. Someone dropped a glass. She turned back to me. Her face cracked. That's not, she started, but her voice hitched. It's not what it looks like, she said, stepping off the stage like she could walk out of this collapse. I stood where I was, unmoving. We were just talking. She tried again, louder now, as if volume could change reality. I said nothing, just stared. It was a mistake, she said quickly. It wasn't even serious. It didn't mean anything. Her hands were trembling. You've been so distant lately. I felt alone. I tilted my head slightly. No emotion. Just calculation. You never notice me anymore, she said, angling her voice for the crowd now, trying to frame herself as misunderstood, wounded. You were always working. Always tired. She stopped when she saw it wasn't working. When she realized no one was stepping in to save her. Then came the sneer. The mockery. What? You think this makes you some kind of hero? You think exposing me here makes you look strong? She snapped. You're pathetic. You think any of them care? I took one step forward, just one, until the space between us felt electric. She flinched. I looked her in the eyes and said, calm and low, every man in this room now sees what I had to sleep beside. Her breath hitched. She tried to speak, but the words stalled in her throat. Her eyes darted toward the exits, then toward the faces that had once smiled at her, now all wide-eyed and silent. Her boss whispered something to a colleague and turned away. Her friends didn't move, didn't speak. She was shrinking in real time, losing inches with every second. Her lip quivered. That confidence she wore like armor turned brittle. Please, she mouthed, too soft to hear. But I heard it. I saw it. The fear. Not of me, but of the world collapsing around her, of losing the image, the status, the lies that held her identity together. And I said nothing more. Not yet. I let the moment hang in the air, suspended like a blade, waiting to fall. I wasn't done. Not by a long shot. She followed me out of the event like a storm behind a man already walking in sunshine. Her heels clicked against the pavement like desperate gunshots, her breath coming in panicked bursts. Wait, just wait a second, she snapped, grabbing at my arm, nails digging in like she could still anchor herself to me. I stopped, turned slowly, the kind of movement you make when you're not surprised by the wreckage anymore. Her face was blotched with rage, mascara smeared under her eyes, hair undone from the frantic exit she made the moment the footage played. You really had to do that? Embarrass me in front of everyone, she hissed. I didn't say a word, just stared. That silence, it rattled her. She needed a reaction, Some proof I was still the man she could guilt or guilt trip. You smothered me. She spat suddenly, voice cracking. You treated me like some porcelain doll. I couldn't breathe in this marriage. I raised an eyebrow, nothing more. She kept going, like a wounded animal biting at shadows. You were boring. Predictable. Everything had to be on your schedule, your routines, your plans, your precious fucking pancake sundaes. I waited. She took a step closer, anger burning now. This wouldn't have happened if you were a real man. Maybe if you'd actually known how to touch me, he wouldn't have had to. That one, she thought that one would land. She expected me to flinch, to recoil, to break. I didn't. I tilted my head slightly and said, he touched you like a pastime. I built your whole life. She froze. That single sentence hit her like a slap. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. For a second, I saw the flicker of understanding, like a crack of lightning through the fog. She tried a new angle. You think you're some kind of hero now? You think what you did in there makes you noble? She snarled. You just humiliated the mother of your child. Your child, remember that. I stared at her for a beat too long, then replied, if it's mine. Her face drained of color. Her lips trembled. You don't mean that, she whispered. I said nothing, because I absolutely did. She shifted tactics again, voice softening, suddenly fragile, almost shaking. You said you loved me. You said you'd always protect me. What happened to us? She looked up at me like a girl begging for shelter in a storm she started. I leaned in slightly, lowered my voice, and said, you killed us between hotel sheets. I'm just burying the body. That was when her mask began to fall apart. She went from begging to bitterness in seconds. You'll be nothing without me, she snapped, stepping back. Good luck finding someone else who'll love your silent, controlling ass. I didn't laugh. I didn't even blink. I just said, I don't need love. I need peace. You've never given me that. Her hand twitched like she wanted to slap me, like violence was her last thread of control. But she didn't. Couldn't. She knew it wouldn't land. She knew she'd already lost every ounce of leverage. So what now? She asked quieter. You just walk away like none of this matters? I looked at her like you look at a dying fire, something that once warmed you, but now just fills the room with smoke. It never mattered to you. I'm just learning to match your energy. Her shoulders sagged, her breathing uneven. The fight in her was dying, replaced by something worse, realization. You're really done, aren't you? She asked, not as a challenge this time, but like someone trying to confirm their own nightmare. I've been done, I replied. I just waited until the ground under you cracked the same way it did under me. She stepped back like the words had weight, like they hurt. Good. They were supposed to. She opened her mouth one last time, but no words came out. Just a breath. Shaky. Hollow. Empty. I turned and walked away, not because it was over, but because I was just getting started. I started with the evidence, assembling it like a trial brief, not for a judge, but for the court of consequence. Every photo, every text, every time-stamped receipt, every bank transaction, every location ping, every lie she ever told that I could now dissect and display with surgical precision. I archived it all, organized by date, by incident, by corroboration. I didn't just want proof. I wanted a timeline. I wanted a narrative she couldn't wriggle out of, couldn't distort with tears or tantrums. I put it all into a password-protected cloud drive, labeled discreetly, and shared it with only one other person, my lawyer, who I'd hired quietly weeks earlier under the pretense of estate planning. He didn't ask questions, just nodded and got to work. I had him file the divorce petition in a different county, quietly, strategically, so the paperwork wouldn't hit her radar until it was already moving through the system. I froze the joint checking account the morning after the event, leaving her just enough to buy groceries and wonder why her debit card stopped working at the salon. I transferred my paycheck into a private account, closed the credit cards she'd been using to fund her little getaways. The SUV she drove was leased under my name. I called the dealership and scheduled a return. When she came outside that Thursday morning and saw it missing from the driveway, she called me in a panic. I let it ring. I wasn't interested in conversations anymore. Only consequences. I rerouted all utility bills and services to my name only, changing passwords, removing her access, step by step. I updated my will, removed her from my insurance policy, locked down every detail of my financial life like a man preparing for siege, because I was. And while I dismantled the logistics of our shared life, I turned to the social front. I mailed a single manila envelope to her parents, marked confidential, containing a USB drive with a carefully compiled folder, clips from the hotel hallway footage, screenshots of texts, a few choice images that left nothing to the imagination. I didn't include a note. I didn't need to. A second package, identical in style, went to her HR department, sent anonymously, but with enough internal context and proof to spark an investigation into her conduct. I wasn't trying to ruin her reputation. I was just showing the truth. Her own behavior was the knife. I just turned it in her hand. I blocked her on social media, but not before posting a single photo on my page. A shot of me, smiling with Bailey, standing in front of the new apartment I'd already secured, captioned, "Peace looks good on me." No drama. No tags. Just the end of a chapter. Her friends saw it. Some of them messaged me privately, confused, concerned, asking what happened. I sent them a link to the folder. No explanation. No commentary. The images spoke louder than I ever could. One of them, a mutual friend she'd known since high school, replied with a single message. "You didn't deserve any of this. If you ever need anything, I'm here." I didn't respond. I didn't need comfort. I was building closure, brick by brick, and I didn't need company for that. I timed it all carefully. The legal motion to establish custody, filed after I learned the paternity test would take another 2 weeks. I marked the form with a note. Pending results, seek full custody or termination of claim, if not biologically related. My lawyer knew what to do. The man was a shark with a silent engine. I set a reminder on my calendar for the day the paperwork would be served. Made sure it landed on her birthday. That morning, she'd wake up to an empty closet, an apartment stripped of my presence. Her phone lit up with emails she couldn't respond to fast enough. And just as the panic set in, the knock on the door would come. The courier would hand her an envelope. Inside would be the divorce papers, the asset list, the custody filing, and a small card that read simply, "You wanted space. I gave you the world without me." I never raised my voice, never touched her, never made a scene. And yet, by the time I was done, she wouldn't recognize the life she stood in, because it wouldn't be hers anymore. It never really was. She just borrowed it, until I reclaimed everything, piece by piece, in silence. It happened at her sister's engagement party, a perfect little gathering of family, old friends, and curated smiles, the kind of event where everyone dresses like they're still in love with their own lives. Her sister had begged me to come, even after everything, saying it wouldn't feel right without me there. I agreed, because I knew what was coming. I showed up in a tailored suit, calm as ever, while she wore a pale blue dress that tried too hard to recapture innocence. She looked like she was playing dress-up in someone else's forgiveness. People smiled, greeted us cautiously, unsure of how close they were allowed to stand. Whispers were already floating through the room, the kind that started a volume just low enough to pretend it's politeness. I didn't have to say a thing. The truth was already in the air, thick and bitter. Her parents arrived later, quiet, stiff, their hugs to her mechanical. Her mother didn't meet her eyes. Her father didn't speak more than 2 words. That was when her nerves started to crack. I saw it in the way she clutched her wine glass, fingers twitching like it was holding her together. Then came her best friend, Kara. She walked in, hugged the bride-to-be, exchanged small talk, then walked right past my wife like she didn't exist. No nod, no glance, nothing. My wife turned, stunned, called after her, voice already climbing with desperation. Kara didn't even flinch. That silence hit harder than any slap. I watched my wife's eyes scan the room. Faces she used to own now barely offering her polite smiles. People who had seen the screenshots, the messages, the video. I'd sent them all out the day before, timed like a missile strike. No commentary, no edits, just pure truth, given oxygen. One of her aunts approached her with a frown, pulling her aside. I couldn't hear the words, but I saw the tears forming in her eyes. Saw her try to explain, waving her hands, pleading only to watch her aunt shake her head slowly and walk away. Then, the final blow. Leo showed up. Not with her. With another woman. Taller. Confident. Holding his arm like she owned him. My wife's eyes locked on them as they entered, and something in her chest visibly collapsed. She walked over to him, fast, too fast, and whispered something. He didn't even pretend to listen. He just smiled, said something short, then turned back to the woman on his arm and kissed her. It was brief, but deliberate, and devastating. My wife froze. Her shoulders dropped. She turned, wobbling slightly in her heels, and looked across the room at me. I was sitting in the corner, relaxed, sipping from a glass of water, not speaking, not smiling, just watching. She saw it all in that moment. Saw what I'd done. Saw the threads I'd pulled. The way I'd stayed quiet long enough to burn her entire world without ever raising my voice. Her face crumbled. She tried to laugh, but it came out wrong, a broken sound that didn't match her face. "This is ridiculous," she said to no one in particular, voice cracking. "This is all just overblown." No one responded. The silence was suffocating. She turned to her sister, the bride-to-be, desperate now. "You don't believe all this, right? You know me. You know me." Her sister stared at her for a long second, then said, clear as glass, "I don't know who you are anymore." That was it. My wife's body seemed to fold into itself. The mask shattered completely. Tears spilled down her cheeks as she looked around, searching for some last familiar face. Some ally. Some anchor. There was none. Just cold eyes. Avoided glances. Judgment cloaked in silence. And me, still seated. Still watching. The only eyes she couldn't escape. She walked toward me, slowly, makeup streaked, shoulders trembling. "Why are you doing this?" she whispered. "Why are you just sitting there?" I tilted my head slightly. Said nothing. Because I didn't have to. She looked like she might scream, but even that strength was gone now. She was unraveling in front of everyone, and there was no saving face, no salvaging dignity. She stood there, hollow and shaking, while the party continued around her like she didn't exist. She finally understood. I had taken everything back, silently, ruthlessly, completely. It happened in the backyard, barely 20 minutes after she broke down in the center of the engagement party. I was standing near the patio, speaking quietly with her father, who hadn't said much all night, just nodded grimly when I handed him the folder. That's when she came storming out, barefoot now, her heels abandoned somewhere inside, mascara streaked down her face, eyes red, wild, unhinged. "You smug, manipulative coward," she hissed across the lawn, loud enough to pull the attention of everyone near us. Heads turned. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Her voice cracked through the air like thunder. "You think you're some kind of saint, exposing me like that? You set me up. You ambushed me." She marched toward me, finger pointed, fury boiling over. "You've been playing the victim while you were orchestrating every second of this. You wanted to ruin me." I didn't move. Her father looked at her. Shame and disbelief etched across his face. "You ruined yourself," I said, voice calm but sharp. "I just showed them what you've been hiding." She scoffed, laughed bitterly. "You think you're clever? That anyone here respects you for this? You're petty. You're vindictive. You're just some spineless little man who couldn't keep his wife interested." A collective gasp rippled through the crowd. Her mother, standing nearby, visibly winced. My sister stepped forward, her fist clenched, but I held up a hand. "Let her speak," I said. "Let everyone hear what she thinks of the man who built her life." My wife turned, eyes darting, realizing too late that everyone had gathered, her friends, co-workers, family, all staring, silent. Even Leo stood off to the side now, arms folded, shifting awkwardly like a boy caught stealing. She saw the camera phones, the eyes, the judgment. And instead of pulling back, she lunged forward. "You treated me like I was your project. Like something you could fix. You think buying gifts and rubbing my feet made up for how empty you were inside," she shouted. "You're not a man. You're a checklist. A routine. A ghost." I stepped forward now, voice low, but loud enough to carry. "You stood at the altar and promised forever. Then you crawled into motel beds and whispered lies to a man who doesn't even want you now." Her jaw clenched. "You never made me feel alive." "No," I said, "I made you feel safe. But you were too shallow to understand the difference." The crowd murmured. Her sister whispered something to their mom, who shook her head slowly. My wife's face twisted. "You made me feel trapped," she screamed. "You took my choices away. You were always watching, judging, waiting for me to mess up." I laughed once, cold, humorless. "No," I said. "I gave you every chance to come clean. I waited. I begged with silence. And you chose to destroy everything instead. You don't get to play righteous now," she barked. "You're not innocent in this." "You're right," I said. "My mistake was loving someone who never had the depth to return it." That landed. Her face fell for a split second. "You think I wanted this?" she snapped, tears returning. "You think I wanted to hurt you?" "No," I said. "You just didn't care if you did." She reached for the last weapon she had, guilt. You're going to tear apart our family over one mistake, she sobbed. One lapse? What about our child? I stepped closer, inches from her face now, voice like frost. That child deserves a mother who tells the truth, and a father who doesn't lay down and take betrayal like it's normal. She staggered back like I'd slapped her. Her father turned away. Her best friend, Kara, covered her mouth and walked off. Leo was already gone. She looked around and saw it. Really saw it. The isolation, the shame, the damage. You're cruel, she whispered. You're heartless. No, I said, stepping back. I'm finally free. And with that, I turned, buttoned my jacket, and walked through the stunned silence. Not a single person stopped me. Because they knew. Because they saw. And because justice, when delivered with precision, needs no applause. Only witnesses. She vanished for a while after the explosion. No messages, no calls, no posts. Just a digital ghost trying to disappear into the ashes of her own life. But the world doesn't forget so easily. Word spread, not because I pushed it, but because truth spreads like wildfire when the lies finally catch flame. Her job let her go quietly a week after the engagement party. No formal statement, just a restructuring that coincidentally began the moment the screenshots landed in HR's inbox. The woman who once strutted into meetings with manicured confidence now packed her desk in silence, avoiding the eyes of people who used to smile at her in the break room. She moved out of the apartment we once shared within 2 weeks. The landlord emailed me asking if I wanted to reclaim it. I declined. That space had already been scrubbed of meaning. I'd already moved on. She tried to reach out. At first, just tentative texts. Can we talk? I need to explain. Then it turned into longer messages. Paragraphs. Memories. Promises. Apologies. I still love you, she wrote. Like those words could undo a year of rot. I didn't respond. Not once. Not even with a period. She began tagging me in old photos on social media. Pictures from vacations, date nights, her holding my hand with a smile that now looked manufactured under hindsight. I ignored them. So did everyone else. Her friend group dissolved. One by one, they removed her from chats, unfollowed, blocked. She became radioactive. Too messy to be near. Even Kara, once her ride or die, posted a picture with me and my dog 2 weeks later captioned, "Real ones only." She moved to a smaller town a few hours away. I only know because her sister told me after we caught up for coffee. Said she was working at a discount home goods store, going by her middle name to avoid recognition. Her sister didn't gloat. She just looked tired. Said she'd offered support, but that she's not the same person anymore. As if the version that cheated, lied, and gaslit everyone was ever the real her to begin with. She kept trying. One night, months after the divorce was finalized, she showed up at my door. I didn't invite her. I hadn't spoken to her since the backyard scene. But there she was, standing outside in the rain, soaked, shaking, eyes red and hollow. She looked nothing like the woman I once loved. Just a skeleton of vanity and consequence. I opened the door, but didn't step aside. She stared at me for a long time, her voice caught in her throat, then finally whispered, "I made the biggest mistake of my life." I said nothing, just waited. "I thought I was finding myself," she said. "But all I did was lose everything that mattered." She took a step closer. "I'm not asking for forgiveness. I know I don't deserve that. But I need you to know. I hate who I became. And I miss who we were." I studied her face. Watched her desperation bleed out in real time. She was searching for something, redemption, closure, a scrap of the warmth I used to offer so easily. But all I had now was truth. Cold. Clean. Final. I leaned against the doorframe and said, "Strange. I don't even remember your voice anymore." Her lips parted like she was going to speak, but no words came. Her face twisted, not in anger, but in a deeper kind of pain. The pain of realizing you aren't just unwelcome, you're irrelevant. I stepped back and closed the door. Didn't slam it. Didn't lock it. Just closed it like ending a chapter. She stood there a while. I could hear her breathing, then sobbing, then silence. I never opened it again. That was the last time I saw her. And I hope it stays that way. So now I ask you, what would you have done if it was your wife?